We can't take this no more. Justice only reserved for the mighty. All nations trying to make the best of what they've got to make a living. All nations trying to keep their head above water, only to keep existing. While they can't protect their own borders, some have to sell their souls. You see that might is right and strength is power. That's what the man say. But how can we as small nations be expected to go on this way? Hey, with these set of warmongers, they satisfying their war hunger. For one reason or another, they messing up the world. These set of warmongers only fulfilling their war hunger, and they feel it makes them stronger. They messing up the world. Selah, Selah, Selah. United only among themselves, there's an exclusion of small nations. Who only have a voice to say yes to their whims, their fancies, and their notions. While a once proud people now live in caves and are forced to fight against the mighty, who make rules but don't abide by them. What a shame, what a shame, what a pity. With the wave of a pen and elected leader in hand, yes, they boast and they toast of democracy. But to me, all warmongers only fulfilling their war hunger, and they feel it makes them stronger. They messing up the world. These set a warmonger, and they not making anything better. All they doing is causing disasters, and they messing up the world. Selah, Selah, Selah. And these warmongers only fulfilling their war hunger, and they're not making anything better. No, 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 they're messing up the world. These set of warmongers only satisfying their war hunger, and they're not making things better. It's only war, war, and rumors of war. We can't take this no more. Justice only reserved for the mighty. All nations trying to make the best of what they've got to make a living. All nations trying to keep their head above water, only to keep existing. that might is right and strength is power. That's what the man say. But how can we as small nations be expected to go on this way? Hey, with these set of warmongers, satisfying their war hunger. For one reason or another, they messing up the world. These set of warmongers only fulfilling their war hunger, and they feel it makes them stronger. They messing up the world. Selah, Selah, Selah. United only among themselves, there's an exclusion of small nations. Who only have a voice to say yes to their whims, their fancies, and their notions. While a once proud people now live in caves and are forced to fight against the mighty who make rules but don't abide by them. What a shame, what a shame, what a pity. With the wave of a pen and elected leader in them, yes, they boast and they toast of democracy. But to be our warmongers, only fulfilling their war hunger, and they feel it makes them stronger. They messing up the world. These set a warmongers, and they not making anything better. All they do is causing disasters, and they messing up the world. Selah, Selah, Selah. Are these warmongers only fulfilling their war hunger, and they're not taking anything better? No, 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 they're messing up the world. These set of warmongers only satisfying their war.
Oh, yes, we start our week with war. Set of warmongers messing up the world, and they're not making anything better. Winston Peters, the mighty gypsy, warmongers. Good evening, Randy. Yes, Randy, we try a thing every now and again. Yes, he said the warmongers. Well, war against people. The death toll goes up. Nobody wins a war. And in this case, it's war against the people. Over 2 million of them crammed in a little spot. Their lives are controlled. Everything about them is controlled by an occupying force. They've had to give up their land for another country. We will reduce the West Bank and Gaza to rubbles. So says the leader of one of the warring force. We pray for all the victims of war. The Israelis and the Palestinians. the Israelis and the Palestinians. We note some people only pray for the Israelis and not the Palestinians. Palestinians are not occupying the Israeli land. We pray for all victims of war. The war will go on. Good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101, our Monday night edition. You all know that what we call Guyana today could have become Israel, well, at least part of it. You all know that fact of history? The British wanted to settle the Israelis in Guyana. We could have been the Palestinians. The Israelis rejected it. And in any case, people like Marcus Garvey raised their voices against settling the Israelis in what we call Guyana today. You all know that fact. We Guyanese, we could have been the West Bank and Gaza on our little strip on the coastland. We would have been. War. We pray for all the victims of war, human victims, and the death toll is going up. It's going up. It's going up. Welcome to all of you to Politics 101 this evening with that historical fact that Israel could have been in Guyana. The Israelis were offered Guyana as a place to settle. As a place to settle. The war will go on. Welcome to you, whether you're joining us from Guyana or you're joining us from the wider Caribbean, our Caribbean, despite what major hype and all those uninformed people, what do they know of the Caribbean that only the Caribbean knows? What do they know of the Caribbean? Who only the Caribbean knows? We will talk a little bit about that tonight. The war will go on.
Performer coming up here on stage this evening is a lady who made some waves a couple of years ago with a song, She'll Die With Her Dignity. She went on and she made it to the final in the Calypso Monarch this year in Trinidad and Tobago. And she was very, very strong. And she's coming to open the show with some war. The name of the song, The War Goes On. I would like you to sit back, relax, Caribbean people, and put your hand together and welcome on stage, singing Sandra. Here she comes, ladies and gentlemen, singing Sandra.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Devastation and destruction from ever since time began has been inflicted time and again by man against fellow man. Yet man wouldn't learn from history it makes him more violent, producing deadly weaponry with nothing but evil intent. So the war could never be over, peace will never be seen, long as man in his quest for power keep destroying fellow human beings, fellow human beings. I'm telling you, nobody, oh, nobody. But when you really look at it, nobody wins a war. Because the agony of defeat will linger. Nations still hating one another and superpowers. They're looking for more power. Look, as long as violence and aggression still dwell in the hearts of man, brother, the war will go on. It cannot be won. No, 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 no. The war will go on. It cannot be won. Fallout from war is chaos. Plenty agony, plenty pain. Economies left in shambles that may never rise up again. Collapse of the money system, disruption of foreign trade, people turning against their leaders for the blunders that they have made. Environmental pollution, radiation taking its course, and the thousands that die in battle. Oh, what a waste of human resource. Of course, I know nobody, oh, nobody. But when I really think of it, nobody wins a war. The brutal clash of ideologies, carnage of social anarchy, and life reduced to pitiful dimensions. The falling back of progress and growth for an entire generation. Sister, it cannot be won. The war will go on. No, 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 the war will go on. It cannot be won. War is just like a racket. It pays dividends for a few. But what does it profit the masses? I mean laymen like me and you. While the leaders playing their chess game, using the masses as pawn with political propaganda. The massacre still goes on. The soldiers, they never started, but they give their lives easily. While those leaders are in a safe place working on strategies. So you see, I'm telling you, nobody, oh, nobody. But when I really look at it, nobody wins a war. It has taken the passage of history with the blood of the weak and the mighty. Great cultures vanish completely. War can create and destroy political boundaries as it goes on. Listen, the war will go on. It cannot be won. No, 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 the war will go on. It cannot be won. The object of war is simple. Just conquer and take over. It doesn't matter how many people get wiped out in the massacre. The enemy must be vanquished. The battle has to be won. But this conflict will never be over. Cause the agony lingers on. There'll always be more dictators. For Hitler's more Saddam Hussein. And with these lunatics in power, it will just start all over again. And I said, I know nobody, oh, nobody. When you really look at it, nobody wins a war. We need a spiritual revolution to stop this brutish aggression. For as peace in the world will always be out of our hands. still live in the hearts of man. Sister, the war will go on. It cannot be won. No, 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 the war will go on. It cannot be won. The war will go on. Peace in the world. Look, we need a spiritual revolution. Lord, put a hand, save the children. Man fighting against man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Spiritual revolution.
Yes, coming as it must come from the Caribbean woman, singing Sandra Devines, singing to the world, we need a spiritual revolution. Coming as it must come from the voice deep within our Caribbean belly, as David Rudder puts it. Our Caribbean belly. And I'm going to address Major Pipe or Hype or whatever his name. Ignorance, where ignorance is bliss. Singing Sandra, singing for our Caribbean, advocating against war. Against war. The war will go on so long as men with greed. That land was the Palestinian land. It was taken from them and given to the Israelis to form their country. What about peaceful coexistence? 2.2 million people crammed in a space that we in Guyana can't imagine. War against people. And who are the victims? People on both sides. We will reduce not Hamas to rubble. We will reduce the West Bank. Who lives in the West Bank? Who lives in Gaza? Who live there? Human beings. And to think that that could have been in our Guyana. I know many of you don't know that fact. Israel was offered land in Guyana to set up the Israeli Jewish state. You all put that in your minds. We could have been the Palestinians. Note that fact of history. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about. Donald Ramotar, the former president of Guyana, he may not be the favorite person of many of you because you're not PPP supporters, but he was a former president. And he said this past week on a program on Globespan 24, and it was repeated, covered in the newspapers, he said that he would have renegotiated the oil contract. That's what he said. He didn't attack anybody. He said he would have renegotiated the contract. And remember, Ramotar had something to do with the oil blocks as we know them today. But he said he would have renegotiated the contract. And what happened next? That pompous chap, I don't want to go back with how I described him last year, but that pompous chap decided that he is going to insult Ramotar. Everybody's an expert now on oil, including former president. What does that boy know about anything? Mr. Jeffrey would say he knows nothing about nothing. But he feels, at least Ramotar knows something about something. But he feels that he is God and nobody can say anything that differs with his opinion and that of his government. That of his government. Therein lies our problem. We are governed by a government, a president, a leader who feels that nobody must differ, must dissent. That is why some of you, I noticed some of them when he went on that program and with his hypocritical self talking about what you call it, reparations, and the white man waded into him, and some people sympathize. I did not sympathize with him because you don't go to England and on the BBC and talk about reparations to black people while you're treating black people like dogs in your country. You have no congratulations from me. And I will urge those of you who listen to this program and who feel that I have something to say, do not be fooled. The chap is up to no good. President Ali is trying his best. And I hear some people even saying, Jack Dio is the problem. Ali is a reasonable man. Ali is as unreasonable as Jack Dio, and in many regards, more unreasonable, because the puppet is worse than the person who's leading him, because he subjects himself, because he has no faculties. If he can treat Ramotar like that, how will he treat you and me who don't share his political party or the views of his political party? So those of you who say, oh, well, Irfan, look, as I said last week, one is Barrett Vorster, Mr. Vorster, who was one of the apartheid leaders. One is Barrett Vorster, and the other one is Irfan Botha. I make no distinction between the two of them, and I make no distinction between them and the rest of the government. They're all the same damn thing. This is not Jack Joe who dressed down Ramotar. It's Irfan Botha. If that's the way you're treating your elder in your own party, how will you treat the rest of us? Hinta Beniba Mekwashiba, take notice. Good evening to all of you. We come on air tonight amidst war. And although we are far away from the Middle East, as I said, we could have been the theater of that war. because Israel was offered to set up their country, their Jewish state in Guyana. I want you all to know that history. Pass it on to your children. Now, I don't pay attention to foolishness. So when my sister drew to my attention about some major hype, who's saying that Guyana is not part of the Caribbean and they accept Guyanese and all that nonsense, and Guyanese push back against it. When my sister first drew it to my attention, I didn't bother with it too much. But then it was so overwhelming that I had to pay some attention. And I noticed some people took on the major hype man and answer him. Look, let me settle this thing. The Caribbean is a region. The Caribbean is not a set of islands. The Caribbean is a region. It is called the Caribbean region. And it includes the islands in the Caribbean Sea and all the mainland country washed by the Caribbean Sea. The Caribbean is a region, not a set of islands. The Caribbean is a region that includes Caribbean islands and mainland countries that are washed by the Caribbean Sea. From Mexico to Belize to Costa Rica to Panama to Colombia to Venezuela to Guyana, all those countries that are washed by the Caribbean Sea, they're part of the Caribbean region. You all tell me, I say so. When you talk about islands, you're talking about the Greater Antilles, big islands, and the Lesser Antilles, small islands, or the Leeward Islands and the Windward Islands. When you want to talk about island, those are the description for the islands. When Mr. Columbus got lost, today's the Columbus Day in America, they celebrate him. When he got lost and landed in Hispaniola, which is home to the Dominican Republic and Haiti, when he landed there, he realized that he had gotten lost. He was headed for the East Indies, what is today Japan and Asia, India and Pakistan, etc. That's where he was headed. And he got lost. And he landed in Hispaniola. And he decided that since he was headed to the East Indies and he got lost and landed in the West, he will call the islands the West Indies. And then he, of course, made later voyages, 2 other voyages. And as he, quote unquote, discovered other lands, not just the islands, but the mainland, he named the region the Caribbean, taking its name from the Carib Indians. That was one of the major tribes. The Caribbean is a region. That is why we said the Caribbean islands and the Caribbean mainland. You know, technically speaking, if you go by just geography, or we just say we're defining the Caribbean as islands, Barbados is not in the Caribbean Sea, you know. Barbados is easterly in the Atlantic. That's why Barbados can get hurricane and all those things that the other islands in the Caribbean Sea have to deal with. So if we were to take an island geography backward definition of the Caribbean that this major hype is into, then Barbados would not be the Caribbean. When the slave ships came across the Atlantic, the British slave ships, the first place they would land is in Barbados. Barbados. They would put off their cargo there. And then the so-called buyers from the other parts of the region would go up to Barbados and they do with the bidding and so on. In fact, they used to break in the slaves in Barbados, what they call seasoning. Barbados is far out there. But we are all part of the Caribbean region. The Caribbean is a regional construct, not an island construct. When we're talking strictly about islands, we may say the West Indies islands, but even that, over time, become known as the West Indies region. When we're talking strictly islands, we have to talk about Windward Islands and Leeward Islands and the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles. You all must invite Major Hype to come on to Politics 101 so we can teach him a few things. The Caribbean is a region. It's a regional construct, not an island construct. And the term island, from a Caribbean standpoint, is never just a piece of land surrounded by water. Guyana, they used to call it an island. So please tell Major Hype, stop his ignorance. And please tell some of our people who are taking him on, don't get into his ignorance. I hear some people say, well, you know, we are South America. I only knew that Guyana was in South America when my mother would write from America as a little boy, and she'll put Guyana, South America. Other than that, and I'm a big man, old man now. I grew up always knowing Guyana is part of the Caribbean. Where you all are going on with this South American thing? We happen to be geographically in South America, as Belize is geographically in Central America. We are regionally and culturally and historically Caribbean. You go on the Caribbean side of Mexico, the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, the Caribbean side of Panama. They're talking just like me and you. Their culture just like me and you. Their food just like me and you. They are on the Caribbean side of those Central American countries. They are Caribbean. Where ignorance is bliss, is a folly to be wise. You all don't worry, Major Hype. We got more hype to deal with than Major Hype. But I just wanted to settle that, because my sister keep reminding me every day, when you're going to deal with this Caribbean thing? When you're going to deal with this Caribbean thing? Let not your heart be troubled. We are Caribbean. We're not South Americans who are Caribbean. We are Caribbean people who are Caribbean people. We have nothing in common with South Americans. Well, let me take that back. We have racial identity. We have history and we have culture in common with Afro South Americans. Whether they're in Brazil, 100 million of them and more, whether they're in Ecuador or Peru or Bolivia or Colombia or Venezuela, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, French Guyanas, and French Guyana and Suriname are part of the Caribbean region because they're the Guyanas. They're the Guyanas. They're part of the Caribbean region. The Guyanas. I hope the CXC people are taking note of this distortion. Major Hype is a comedian. Simply put a clown. Exactly, John. Exactly. So y'all don't get worked up with this Major Hype guy. Y'all don't get worked up with this Major Hype guy. We are all mixed up as a people. We are a Caribbean people. You know, I always tell people, you see them black South Carolinians, Bayesian, they first sent 133 Barbadians there to introduce rice to South Carolina, what is now South and North Carolina. All those black Americans there, a lot of them have to change their ancestry back to Barbadian. They have those islands off the coast of the Carolinas there. When you listen to them, you're talking like Jamaicans and West Indians and so on. People have to know their history before they open their mouth and talk stupidness. But as John said, the boy is a comedian. And perhaps you all are taking him too seriously. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. I see MP, Sister Nima Flu-Bess, welcome back. Welcome back from Ghana, the mother country. You must have a lot to tell us. We'll have to get you on to Politics 101 to talk about your trip to Ghana. We'll have to get you on. Sister Bess went there as part of a parliamentary team to a meeting to Ghana. And of course, a lot of those who were stolen from Africa, they were stolen partly from what is now Ghana, used to be the old Gold Coast, ancient Ghana as they call it, during the period of antiquity, the Ghana civilization. I was traveling the other day in a Uber, and the driver was from Sierra Leone, and he said, "Are you from Ghana or Nigeria?" And I smiled, and he said, "Well, why are you smiling?" I know a lot of Nigerians sometimes don't like to say they're from Nigeria. I say I'm from neither Ghana nor Nigeria in terms of country. But I am from Ghana and Nigeria in terms of origins. And he was a little bit confused. So I had to explain to him. He said, "But man, you look so much Ghanaian and so on." So yeah. We came from that Gold Coast. And we're going to have Sister Nima Flu-Bess on to talk about the meeting that she went to, but more importantly, we want to talk to her about our experience as an African Guyanese, as a Caribbean Guyanese, going to the motherland, and I'm sure she would have done the tour, not as a tourist, but as someone who is a descendant of those people who were brutally stolen from Africa and brought across the Atlantic. So we're going to have Sister Nima Flubes joining us in a couple of days. Welcome to all of you. So Major Hype, we done with him. We started by talking about the way Irfan Ali responded to Donald Ramotar. And you know, I know that political people would say, well, let them fight among themselves, that's good for us. Yeah, I recognize that. I don't have a problem with that. But I think there's something more profound than them fighting among themselves. It's a signal that the PPP has no intention of accommodating any other view in Guyana. That is the lesson. If they cannot accommodate Donald Ramotar, and Donald Ramotar didn't attack the PPP, he didn't attack the government. 9 out of 10 times Donald find a way to, you know, explain away even some of the wrong things that the PPP, he's an all PPP man. One expects him to do that. But there must be a point where party loyalty stops and the interest of your country begins. There must be. And all Brother Ramotar was saying, and I have to confess, I still have a good relationship with people like Ramotar, and Rohi, because when I came into politics as a small boy in the 70s, they were the youngsters in the PPP, and we related to each other because we were on the same political side at that time. And our relationship continues to this day. Ramotar has criticized me. We have difficulty. We have disagreement on the question of race. Same thing with Rohi. You know, these guys are Marxists, and they don't put the same store on race as we Black Marxists do. And insofar as I'm a Marxist, I'm a Black Marxist. I'm not a Marxist, you know, who is steeped in the European explanation of reality. I do believe that race and ethnicity are real things. Marxists say that race and ethnicity are what they call false consciousness. I don't believe that. And that is where we Black Marxists, and there's a whole school of us Black Marxists going right back to Du Bois, coming right through. I remember C.L.R. James saying, you know, he had to go to Mexico and lecture Trotsky on the Negro question, because the European Marxists did not take into consideration the weight of slavery and what that does to people's consciousness. So I have my disagreements with Ramotar and Roy and, you know, Gail Toucher and those people who I've known now for 5 decades. Great disagreement. But we have good relations. I don't know the youngsters in the same way. But I have to tell you that there is a qualitative difference between the two groups. The younger ones now, the Irfan Bota and Barrett Foster and them, their view of the world, their worldview, is much different. And I don't have a problem with difference. I don't expect young people to view the world in the same way that those of us view the world going back to when we were young. I don't have a problem with that. But you have to accommodate diversity. That is what makes us and what will make us a viable nation. But these chaps cannot accommodate diversity in their own party. If you disagree with Ramotar, pick up the phone. Donald, man, let me talk this thing, you know. Your criticism or your view goes against the line of the government. But no, you feel that you can put down Ramotar. At least Ramotar knows something about something. Ramotar has a history of struggle. And I take umbrage to a little boy taking eyes and pass. Wisdom. Insofar as there is wisdom in the PPP, it comes not from Irfan Ali and them. They're anti-wisdom. But the lesson is, if that's the way they are treating their own, there is no place in their Guyana for us. They can't have a one Guyana in their own party. They're going to have a one Guyana with us, the rest of us. Into Beniba Mekwashiba take notice. These people are scams. They have no intention of no one Guyana and sharing Guyana. That is the existential challenge we have. And that is why my view is very clear. Ultimately, I think we need a government of national unity. That has been the position of my political party from the time we were born in 1974. That ultimately, you have to have a government of national unity if Guyana is going to be governed for all its people. The PNC tried to govern on their own, didn't make it. Successive PPP governments have tried, didn't make it. We ultimately have to have an all-inclusive government that include, as Sir Arthur Lewis said, that all those who are affected by the decision must be at the table to make that decision. I live by that definition of democracy. But the PPP has turned its back repeatedly on a national government and a national consensus. It means that for us to achieve a government of national unity, the PPP has to be removed from office first. They are not going to negotiate a national government with the mindset of domination that is abroad in that party. So for us to achieve a real government of national unity, this PPP has to be removed from office. This PPP has to be removed from office. That is a prerequisite to a national government. The Jagans, after initial hesitancy, accepted the notion of a national government. They came out with a national patriotic government in 1976-77. They were in talks with Burnham just before he died in 1985. Jagan said he wanted the Mandela formula for Guyana, because when Mandela got power after going through all of that horrors from the Bottas and the Malans and the Fosters and the de Klerks, he came out, he won the election, but he brought the apartheid party into his government. He made Mr. de Klerk a vice president. He set aside a number of parliamentary seats for them and set up a government of national unity. One of my disappointments with the post-Mandela ANC is that they did not continue with that national government formula. In Zimbabwe, as much as they cost Mugabe brought in the opposition into a government of national unity. He made the leader of the opposition party the prime minister. Over in Kenya, after a disputed election that was given to Jomo Kenyatta's son, Uhuru Kenyatta, he eventually brought in his father, the son of his father's arch rival, Raila Odinga. He brought him into a national government in Kenya. Jagan said he preferred the Mandela formula. He took office, he was there from 92 to 97. Unfortunately, he didn't push for the Mandela formula. And he died and left the government to these fellas who do not want to share Guyana. You see, when we talk about power sharing, we're not talking about sharing anybody's power. We're not sharing PPP power or PNC power. We are sharing Guyana, our power. Power belongs to the people. And ultimately, for a place like Guyana to work, it is not going to work with Indians crossing over to the PNC or black people crossing over to the PPP. That is not going to solve our problem. Or as some people said, Douglarise the country. If you know anything about Douglarism, if you're Douglarizing Indian and African, you get African Douglas and you get Indian Douglas. So those things are not going to solve our problems. Our problems are going to be solved over what we fight for, what we fight over, and that is power. And by power, we mean the ability to determine who gets what, when, and how. So power sharing doesn't mean sharing anybody's power. So we have to get to a government of national unity. We have to get there. That is what's going to at least allow us to live together without fighting each other as they're doing there right now in the Middle East. We don't want to get there. Half of the population said they don't want the PPP, and the other half said they don't want the opposition parties. And we must respect that. But we must find a way to accommodate it. Desmond Hoyt, who had great difficulty with power sharing, in the end in 2002, August, said power sharing is an idea whose time has come. Unfortunately, he died 3 months later. Robert Corbyn tried to work out a power sharing arrangement with the PPP, with Jack Dio. I am told that Jack Dio scuttled the thing. They arrived at an agreement. And the view is that it was the Jack Dio people who scuttled the thing. Apparently, Jack Dio people argue it was Mr. Jagan who scuttled it. We don't know. But it was scuttled by the PPP. The APNU ran on power sharing. They ran on the slogan, 51 cannot equal 100 and 49 equal nothing. 2011 and 2015. And when the coalition got power in 2015, Mr. Granger held out the olive branch to the PPP, and they said no. He put Nagamutu in charge to begin talks with them. They said no. One can argue that Mr. Granger should have said, okay, you all don't want Nagamutu, put somebody else and call their bluff. But we are not going to get anywhere in Guyana with oil or without oil. We can solve. We can build the best roads. I saw the best road structures when I went to South Africa. Out of this world. So we can solve our infrastructure. We can solve poverty. We can solve all the ills. Sorry, not poverty. We can solve all the other things. Until we solve poverty and race, we're not doing anything in Guyana. That is why our party, the Working People's Alliance, has said that our twin approach is to solve the problem of poverty and the problem of racial division. And we are not talking about half-baked things like douglarization and crossover. What we are talking about is putting in place a governance structure that accommodates our racial preferences. Indian people alone are not going to develop Guyana. Black people alone are not going to develop Guyana. We got to do it together. But this thing that you have to cross over to me, you have to come to me, one Guyana, or you have to come to me, one people, one nation, one destiny, is nonsense. You have a right to stay where you are and be accommodated. Indian people will not build Guyana on their own. I don't care how much money they get. African people are not going to build Guyana alone. I don't care how much soldier and police they get. We got to build it together, but not on simplistic notions. We supported the coalition because we thought it was the first step in the direction of a national government. And we continue to support that notion. So Irfan Ali has shown his hand. And I want you all to stop this thing that he better than Jack Dio. He's worse than Jack Dio. At least Jack Dio knows something about something. This chap Ali knows nothing about nothing. He runs about the place chatting nonsense. He's destroying trade unions. He's destroying trade unions. He's destroying whatever bond there is between Africans and Indians. He's destroying Amerindians. He wants the oil only for a select few. He's dangerous. Even more dangerous than Jack Dio. And this artificial thing that Jack Dio is the devil and he is some little angel, you're cut that nonsense. Ali is dangerous to Indian people, but who am I to tell Indian people how to deal with their story? I believe he's dangerous to Indian people, and Indian people have to work that out. What they're doing, they're endangering Indian people. Just as Netanyahu and them are endangering ordinary Jewish people in Israel. We have to begin to reorient ourselves. We have to begin to think a new way. Part of what we're doing is partisan. I belong to the WPA. WPA is part of the opposition. So part of our work is opposition work. But part of our work has to be national work. It has to be the work of the nation. And when you see a president like that who is working against the nation, then you know that we are in trouble. We are in trouble. This is an apartheid regime. The regime in Guyana is an apartheid regime. Apartheid PPP style. Apartheid PPP style. They're always lecturing the opposition, telling us what we should do, and we should try for crossover vote, and we should this, and we should that. We don't need anybody to lecture us. We are very clear about the future of this country. And the future of this country has to be a future that includes all its people, not as window dressing, but as real living organisms in the body politic of our country. We've got to walk on all planks. We've got to get the PPP out of there so we can start working for this country. That $211 million that they gave away and blaming it on some little boy in the ministry. You know what that $211 million would do? It's almost $1 million want to divide the households in Guyana. With that $211 million, people get a good small piece to help to deal with the high prices in the market. But they rather to give that money to Exxon than to give it to the Guyanese people. One Guyana, one PPP Guyana. And that PPP Guyana doesn't include Ramotar. It don't include Rohi. It don't include Inja Chanjapal. It don't include Clinton Callimore. It now come out. The one Guyana does not include the PPP stalwarts. And if it don't include the PPP stalwart, how the hell it can include Aubrey Norton and David Patterson and Don Hastings and Kidaki Amsterdam and Ogunse, Amanza Desir. How can it include them if it doesn't include Ramotar? Venezuela is at our door. But I'm not supporting the government on Venezuela. I'm not supporting no Guyana government on Venezuela. I'm supporting the people of Guyana against Venezuela, not that government. Because that government has no place for me. I'm supporting the government of Guyana when it comes to Venezuela. I'm supporting Guyana when it comes to Venezuela. Treat the youths right. Treat the children right. And this government, the worst government in our English-speaking Caribbean region ever since colonialism, the worst. And we have had questionable governments, but this one is the worst. This one is the worst. And we've got to remove this government before we can begin to put the real democratic guardrails in place. This government is anti-democracy. Imagine this government is calling people like myself unpatriotic, calling those of us who went to Washington, Rickford Burke and others, unpatriotic. We didn't crawl by night and pay lobbyists hundreds of millions of dollars to overthrow a government. That's not what we did. We went there in broad daylight. And we stated our case. We would prefer the Americans not to be involved in Guyana, but they're there. Their investment, they're a superpower. They have to determine who governs. We said to them, we don't want regime change because we're against regime change. But we want to change from an apartheid regime to a democratic regime. And we feel that we in the opposition can play a major role in bringing about a democratic regime, a non-apartheid regime. Tomorrow night we're going to have Dr. Jeffrey here, Dr. Henry Jeffrey. He hasn't been on for a while. We're going to have him on, and we're going to continue this conversation. So you all leave Major Hype alone. The boy and know anything. He's a comedian. But you all pay attention to this PPP government that has no place for a Donald Ramotar. In the 2011, Dr. Rupert Rupnarine, one of my party elders, coined the rallying cry on the platform, "No room for Donald." And we were making the point of how the Jacques Diot government had no room for Donald Ramotar before he became the presidential candidate. They never made him a minister before he became the presidential candidate. And Rupert coined the rallying cry, "No room for Donald." Well, Donald became president and earned his place in the room. But these boys, they are pushing Donald out of the room. All because he said he would have renegotiated the contract. They're pushing Donald out of the room. They're pushing Donald out of the room. We are continuing to keep an eagle eye on them all the time. All the time. Let us pray, those of us who are praying people, let us pray for the people in the Middle East, Israelis and Palestinians, ordinary Israelis and Palestinians whose lives are being lost. Let us pray for them. But let us be very clear that justice must be justice and right must be right. You cannot push 2.5 million people, box them into a little piece of land, have them living in squalor, determine whether they move or don't move, whether they leave or don't leave, determine you can turn off their electricity when you want to, you can turn off their water when you want to. That is a permanent declaration of war. And we must say it. One doesn't have to lend solidarity to Hamas. My solidarity is to the Palestinian people. It's like Venezuela having the power to turn off electricity in Guyana or turn off our water. But the ordinary Israelis must not be made to suffer for the bad deeds of their leaders. Israelis' lives are not more precious than Palestinian lives. They are human beings. They are human beings. We can only hope and we can only pray that our Guyana does not become like that. Our Guyana does not become like that. But if the PPP has its way, they will turn our Guyana into that inferno that is happening there. And as Singing Sandra says, nobody wins a war. Nobody wins a territorial war. Nobody wins a racial war. Nobody wins an ethnic war. And we don't want war in Guyana. Because our war is going to be an ethnic war, a racial war, and those are the worst kinds of war. Part of what is going on there in the Middle East is an ethnic war. An uneven war. It's an ethnic war. We do not want that in our Guyana. We must not want it in our Guyana. Nobody wins a war. I'll see you all tomorrow night. Brother Henry Jeffrey is going to be here, and we're going to continue our coverage of Guyanese politics, politics in our region, our Caribbean region. And remember, the Caribbean is not the Caribbean islands. The Caribbean is the Caribbean region. The Caribbean is a regional construct, not an island construct. Insofar as Major Hype can learn, you all teach him that. Agon, good night, love, love as always.